Started. That's what I have to say for today. I could just sigh and close it all out. I don't know. I don't know what sort of words I have to say at this point. This has been one of the most depressing Shabbats, now Tisha B'Av, but it's hard to believe it can go from bad to worse around here in terms of feeling, in terms of what's going on. Um, the release on Friday and Saturday of the films of the hostages was no surprise, but it was a gut wrench just the same. The reality of seeing their condition and realizing that they are probably not the worst of all of the people. In other words, there are probably hostages that are probably worse. And I have no doubt there are hostages who we think are alive and are probably not alive at all. But um, I guess that's worse. Um, I don't know. Like I said, it was very, very difficult. On Shabbat, a little after 10 in the morning, I walked over to Hostage Square, second time of the day, because they were having a ceremony there. The hostage families, the husbands, fathers, it's why mothers, a few cases, wives, brothers, sisters, were standing behind barbed wire and crying out for someone to save their loved ones. And I've been to Hostage Square practically every Saturday night in the last almost 2 years, and I've heard them speak, whatever. But yesterday it was just so raw. It was so completely raw. I couldn't stay more than 20, 25 minutes. I mean, that was my weakness, not to be able to hear their cries and how strong it was, uh, standing right there, 20 feet away on the other side of barbed wire, which was set up for the purposes of making the event, you know, theatrical. And the sense that we're stuck and there's almost nothing that can be done because, okay, the government finally and the United States finally woke up to the fact that this idea of a partial deal was never going to happen. It was absurd to begin with. It would only have worked if the Israeli government had been quiet and made believe that after the partial deal, there'd be a real deal. But every time a member of the government, including the prime minister, would say, well, afterwards we'll destroy Hamas. I mean, Hamas isn't stupid. Why would they agree to a partial deal if you're saying that afterwards we're going to destroy you? I mean, it just makes no sense for them to have accepted it. They delayed, and they delayed until such a time as they've now gotten us into a terrible box because our situation in the world has deteriorated so rapidly in the last few weeks, all thanks to this misgotten policy. Netanyahu started this policy of turning off the food in order to keep, to get Smotrich and Ben Gvir happy. And remember, we walked away from, there was an agreement before. There was an agreement that we were supposed to negotiate the final end of the war. We walked away from it. We violated the agreement and walked away. We don't like saying that, but that's the fact. It wasn't Hamas who walked away. We walked. Now, maybe we would never have reached an agreement with them. That's very possible. Maybe our minimum demands for Gaza after the end of the war don't will never reach what Hamas wants. That's more than possible. But what's also a fact, and this is part of the problem, is that this government has not been willing to accept that on October 7th we lost the war. Everything else has been commentary since then. October 7th, the minute they took hostages, we lost the war. And everything else, we can say, do whatever we want. They knew what they were doing. I'm not sure there's some question of were they really planning to do some of the massacres they did or not, or that wasn't planned. But let's assume they did because they wanted to totally drive us nuts. But their goal was to take hostages in the view that if they took hostages, they could ensure the fact that they would survive the war. And we refused to accept that. And the war has been going on for 2 years almost. a war where, this Witkoff plan, this stage plan, which was created as a stage plan only for the purposes of Netanyahu, so that he could, he could claim he was going to go back to war, so that the Smotrich and Ben-Gvir wouldn't leave the government. Well, that was first proposed by Biden in April, not this past April, in April of a year ago. I remember that, and I've written about it. I remember that very, very well. I remember being on TV one day. I was together with actually um, a security analyst who had been the commander of Sayeret Matkal, the elite commando unit. We were on together one day, and we were both very, very pessimistic. And how's we going to get out of this? And we're really in a bind, etc. And then there was the Biden plan that was which was supposedly also Bibi's plan. And so we said, oh, here we go. We were hopeful. And literally, the same two people were on the air one night, followed by the next day. And the night we were very pessimistic, the day we were optimistic. We thought, hey, there's a chance we can get agreement here because it was Bibi's plan, Biden behind it. It would work. Well, this is basically the Witkoff plan, so to speak. But and eventually leading to the end of the war. Well, that was a year and what are we, a year and 3 months ago, 4 months ago already at this point. I don't want to calculate how many soldiers have died since that point. I don't want to calculate how many hostages have died since that point. But all for what exact purpose? What have we accomplished? Now, yes, we had a war with Hezbollah that was very successful, thankfully. But that wasn't the plan. It wasn't, let's not come to a hostage deal because we want to get to a war with Hezbollah. We got into war with Hezbollah mostly by accident. We were forced into the war because the beepers were about to be unveiled, and the decision was not to let that opportunity be lost. So we basically let's set the beepers off and started that war. The war was started by Hezbollah, obviously much earlier, but we decided to make it, to go much stronger on it. It was very, very successful, thanks to 10 years of planning. That's what happens when you plan a war for 10 years. Same thing with our war with Iran. That was a decision that Netanyahu made. He got um, he got Trump to agree, some version therein. That was incredibly successful because that's what happens when you plan something for 10 years, especially when it's the Air Force. In both cases, it's the Air Force and the Mossad, the two organizations of this country that work well. I'm not sure there's any other organizations that work well in this country, but those two work very, very well. And they succeeded in doing what they had to do. And, thankfully, but that wasn't the reason we didn't go to an agreement a year ago. It had nothing to do with that. We didn't go to an agreement because Netanyahu didn't want to lose his coalition or take risk of losing his coalition back then. So here we are. And here we are in a worse condition because to do nothing, well, the world is pushing us to end the war, right? Everyone's pushing to end the war, but the terms that Hamas is now offering are much worse. Now, even if we were to agree to end the war and pull out of Gaza, they also want the level of prisoners that they never requested earlier, some who we would not be willing to give up. They want live prisoners for dead bodies, a whole series of things that they're now demanding that they feel they can get away with because of our standing in the world right now. And because our standing in the world is getting worse by the day. And every day we keep going on in Gaza at the moment, the standing gets worse. Now, let's make this very clear. I don't think we had a policy of starvation ever. I do think we had incompetent people running things. We miscalculated how much food was available in Gaza when we started this because there had been a tremendous amount of food that went in during the ceasefire, many times the amount of food that Gaza needed daily, but we didn't really know where it all went, let's put it that way. B, we came up with this cock-and-mickin' idea of setting up this fake American corporation to distribute the food in 4 locations that everyone said wasn't going to work. Well, guess what? It didn't work. Well, got some food out there. Yes, it did. Absolutely. You want to take a truck and deliver, drop a bunch of food at the edge of Gaza, it'll also be taken. Now, this was better than that, but it didn't accomplish the goal that it was set out to be. 4 locations would never do that. 4 locations set up the way it did would never do that. And some level of Gazans got killed while trying to get there. I say some level because we do not know what percentage of them were killed by Hamas, what percentage of them were killed just because stampedes, and what percentage of them were killed by our own troops who were afraid of stampeding Gazans coming to try to take the food. But some percentage were killed. And take that together with the pictures of starvation, half of them fake, maybe 80% of them fake, maybe 30% of them fake. We don't know. At this point, in this day and age, one of our biggest problem, not one of ours, everyone's problem is going to be we'll never be able to tell what's fake and what's real, what videos are fake and what are real, because everything can be made by AI at this point. But let's assume that some percentage are real. We know for a fact that there is hunger in Gaza. We know there's hunger in Gaza because Israelis who are in touch with people in Gaza on a regular basis, people who oppose Hamas, talk about how they don't know where they're going to get enough food to eat. They're not eating enough food to really live by, and they report the price of flour in the markets are approximately 30 times what they were a few months ago. So if the price of flour is so high, that means that people can't afford to buy it. Even if it's there, you can't afford to buy it. And it's so high because there isn't very much supply and demand. So there is clearly hunger in Gaza. Are there babies starving? Probably not. Are there babies, however, who had all sorts of other diseases who not getting enough nutrition is complicating the situation? Absolutely. No question about it. Would any one of us want to be in Gaza? The answer is absolutely not. And again, everything comes down to the fact that we've been fighting this for so long. We could do this for 2 months, 3 months. The world was okay with that. But this is a year, and it'll be almost 2 years. The rule of thumb was always we couldn't go beyond 6 weeks in a war before the world would stop us. I think I wrote last week that what happened is we had two very, very pro-Israel presidents. We had Biden, followed by Trump, who were incredibly pro-Israel. And as I wrote, they gave us lots and lots of rope. They let us do what we want to do, but just enough so we could hang ourselves in the world. And that's what we've done. We've gotten to a situation where Israelis are being attacked wherever they are in Europe if they say that there is, if it's clear that they say it's Israeli, they speak Hebrew or anything else like that. There's no question that um, rising anti-Semitism in the world is not unconnected to our war. I'm not saying it's not a one-for-one result, but it's clearly not unconnected. There was a demonstration today in Australia with 60,000 people against us. In Australia, this is a country that uh, has no long history of antipathy towards us. Now, it's true there's been a significant Muslim immigration to Australia, and it's also true that if we look at the countries that have the most demonstrations against us, there's a pretty much one-to-one relationship between the Muslim immigrants over the last 20 years, or the last 5 years, or 10 years, and how they feel about Israel. Clearly, it's a major, major impact. I mean, you don't even have to go to the case uh, this past week in France, where there was a Gazan who was let in for humanitarian grounds, and then the French came up with the fact that she called Hitler a great person, called for killing all the Jews, and a whole bunch of other very vile things that weren't only related to Israel, but also related to Jews. She was just been ordered thrown out of the country, and the plan to admit Gazan refugees suspended. That's one of the things I get very upset at this idea that we're gonna have the Gazans move out of Gaza. Why do I get upset about it? Because I worry about diaspora Jewry also. All you want to do is send 1 million or 2 million people who hate our guts and hate Jewish guts, and let them spread around the world and spread their filth. I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's a very bad idea, frankly. And I think, keep them in Gaza, much better. At least we know where they are. And at least if we have to, we can go back in and do something about them. We can't do anything about them if they end up in New Zealand and if they end up in Italy and all sorts of places spewing anti-Semitism, spewing conspiracy theories, you name it. So I always think it's a terrible, terrible idea. It goes against the whole idea of Zionism, and no one really is willing to talk about that, but it's a really, really bad idea. Leaving aside the moral issues completely. In other words, I'm putting aside the moral issues of moving these people out. It's less of a moral issue than people think because this isn't their homes. Most of them are considered refugees. So why be a refugee? You can be a refugee in Gaza, you can be a refugee in Libya or somewhere else. But leave that part aside again. I don't want to get into the moral issues, although I think the moral issues are real. But looking for the good of the Jewish people, I think that's something that we need to keep in account and why this would be a terrible thing, in my opinion. So, anyway, um, so here we stand. We can't, the world is pushing us to end the war. The problem is they have our hostages. We can't end the war without getting back our hostages. The terms for returning our hostages are getting worse. And so, what might have been a reasonable, even terrible deal in terms of the number of Palestinian killers we had to let go is getting worse and worse every day. They feel that their position is stronger. They're not really rushing for a deal because every day this goes on, our situation gets worse. They can keep on claiming people are dying from starvation, even that. How can we prove it wrong, right? What can we do to say they're not dealing from starvation? We're gonna open up a Hilton buffet in downtown Gaza to show there's plenty of food. I mean, maybe it's some brilliant ideas someone would have. It would require us to do things, but we're not really good at doing things, frankly, in a positive sense. We have no information services. We have no Hasbara, which just doesn't cure everything, especially when the policies are bad. But it helps. We have none. We have nothing. We've had nothing for 50 years, and it's gotten worse. It's just an amazing thing how bad it's become. So, what do we do at this point? How do we bring this to an end? I mean, this government will not, at this point, agree to any deal that they can't say is a victory. Netanyahu needs to say, I'm victorious. So the attempt right now is to have an all deal that'll include disarming of Hamas, them leaving control of Gaza, and a whole bunch of other things, and then we'll agree to pull out of Gaza. But these are terms that Hamas is not going to agree to. They might have agreed to a few weeks ago, but now that our diplomatic situation has gotten so bad, what's their rush? Well, I agree. Let's see what happens. See what other parts of the world put pressure on Israel. And Israelis are finally waking up to the fact that the pressure is really significant and it's starting to have its effect. Now, it's not the threatening um, to recognize the Palestinian state. That's just a symptom. It's possibly cutting us off from Horizon funding, which gives $500 million a year to our universities. It's eliminating the free trade agreement that we have with Europe. Mind you, President Trump just eliminated the free trade agreement that Israel has had for the last 20 years with the United States. The lover of Israel, by the way, all you people who love Trump for his love of Israel, and he likes Israel, but it doesn't cover things like trade. You just put a 15% tariff on Israeli goods. We'll lose at least $1.5 billion in trade at the moment, and that's before decisions are made about pharmaceuticals and computer chips. So we're likely to lose $1.5 billion in trade because of the tariffs he just put on. And we will lose possibly more because we used to have a favored nation status over other countries like Turkey or even the EU. We paid lower taxes duty because we were free trade into the United States. We're no longer free trade. We're 15%. So our economy is going to be hurt by that. They're talking about eliminating the ability of Israelis to go to Europe without visas. Um, well, those of us who have American passports still won't affect yet. I'm sure that the Europeans assume put visas on Americans because of what Trump will do, but we'll put that part aside. Um, a whole long list of things that could happen if we continue down this path. And then continuing down this path includes, these crazy ideas. Well, seems like a perfect time that we should pass a resolution that we should annex the West Bank right now. Seems just perfect. The world is at our backs. Let's just do something like that. Or perfect time for Ben-Gvir, our Minister of National Security, to get himself filmed on the Temple Mount, going in places where Jews don't generally go and praying there. Now, again, the old saying, it's better to be smart than right. And yes, Jews should be allowed to go on Temple Mount, and Jews should be allowed to pray there if they want. But we've had a status quo for all of these years. This is the wrong time to be playing with the most combustible place in the Middle East. Almost all the major, the Hebron riots and go all the way back to the Second Intifada, they all started in some form or another relating to the Temple Mount. Is this the time in the middle of this war where our world support is close to zero for our national leader, who's not some minor political person, but he's the Minister of National Security, supposedly, for him to go on the Temple Mount and say, well, we should be able to pray there. And so I'm going to pray there publicly. And for our Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskel, who's was with rejoined the government with Gideon Sa'ar. I don't want to talk about Gideon Sa'ar. I have only negative things. It's Tisha B'Av. I shouldn't say negative things about a fellow Tel Avivian, but well, you can assume what I think about him. But she's from his group that rejoined the coalition. She's a deputy foreign minister. Foreign ministers are supposed to be dealing with improving foreign relations. No, she had to go on the Temple Mount today as well because she got her picture. And now what is she worried about right now? She's worried about the Likud primaries. That's all these people care about. Every one of their actions is only aimed at the base so that more people come vote for them in the primaries coming up in 6 months or 3 months. It's not clear when the primary is going to be. So you have to do the most outrageous thing you can so you get seen, so you get written up, and so you get votes in the primaries. The fact that you're deputy foreign minister and responsible for our relations in the world, nah, why is that important? Why should that make any difference to what they do? I mean, it's absurd. Any rate, as you can see, I'm just a little bit upset. Um, and quite frankly, quite depressed in the sense that it's just too much. Just too much. I mean, on the personal level, the no rockets. Well, I take that back. We get rockets on a semi-regular basis a couple of times a week, and we get notifications, and we still go down to the bomb shelter. Not everyone does. The Yemen rockets have mostly, almost all, but not all, have been intercepted. But leave that part aside. The national mood is grim. There's no other way around it. There's no one who saw those films of the hostages can think anything else. Now, the TV today was busy, and the Israeli papers have been busy, upset by the fact that the international media has not been making a big deal out of the photos of our hostages who are close to dying in the caves or tunnels of Hamas. I understand their anger. I mean, it was interesting. The New York Times it's first put an article about it, and then finally, in the middle of the article, sometime in the middle of the night last night, they included a still of one of the pictures, but wouldn't include the video. Well, they show lots of other vivid videos of Gazans who are hungry or being hit or whatever. But there is a lack of understanding amongst the Israeli public how bad the situation is outside the country. Because until very recently, we saw none of the photos from Gaza whatsoever. Now we're seeing just a little bit, not very much. And people have made the argument, which is true, that we don't have any room, that our pain has been so great since October 7th that there's no room for anyone else's pain. And that may be true. And yes, the pain of the soldiers who die is very strong and hits all of us very strongly. And all those things are very, very true. But the problem with all that is that Israelis then don't understand why the world hates us. Why does the world hate us? They don't get what the world is seeing. And, again, it's not all that important, although it is important, how much of what the world is seeing is actually true or how much of it is doctored to some extent. And a lot of it is doctored, a lot of it is put on in certain ways, and a lot of it doesn't show the whole truth and all those things like any good propaganda does. However, Israelis need to understand that this is what we're up against. This is what the world is seeing. And unless we have a counter narrative that's really strong, that's done professionally, that appears all over TikTok and you name it, why should we be surprised that we've lost all those people under 35 in the world, worldwide? United States, Europe, Asia, wherever it is. We've lost, the TikTok generation has been lost completely. I mean, early in the war, it was basically a survey showed that there was 12-1, the number of pro-Israel versus anti-Israel videos on TikTok. Now, Part of that could be the algorithm that the Chinese want to do. Part of that could be the fact that there are a billion Muslims in the world and only, less than 20 million Jews. So who's going to be producing all these TikTok videos? And the Jews are old people, right? So, how many of us produce TikTok videos? Um, Talking to people on this call, but even generally speaking, we have less kids in most cases. And the part of our population with lots of kids isn't doing work on TikTok, let's put it that way. So it's not a surprise, but that's the reality. It's the reality we live in right now. Now, go back to the reality, and I don't want to repeat myself, but look, we made really, really bad mistakes in our plan to cut off the food, cut off Hamas's oxygen by cutting the food and and thinking we're going to get the food directly to the people of Gaza. It was a brilliant idea, but it was executed so poorly that it should never have been executed because the way it was planned would never work. And everyone told them it wouldn't work, and it didn't work. Big surprise. I mean, it doesn't require military genius to understand the fact that if you put an aid center 5 miles from where the people need to get it, that poor people, that weak people, that women and children are not going to get it. And then if you be open only an hour or two a day or whatever it is that they're open, that people are going to rush to get it all at one time. If you're open 24/7 and you open at all times, and there was always going to be food there, and you moved it closer to where the population was. I mean, again, I'm not planning it and I'm not involved in it, but if you did something like that, maybe it would work. But if you're going to be open 2 hours a day and you put it 4 miles away, what do you think is going to happen? So, someday when there is finally a vada to look into the mistakes relating to this war, mostly the mistakes leading up to October 7th, but there needs to be a separate one or the same one talking about all the mistakes we made since October 7th, because they're many and long and they've been a disaster. Anyway, we're at the halfway point now that I finished my rant. I don't know if I provided much information, but I'll be happy to provide any information if people want on any other subjects relating to Israel now. So please raise your virtual hands and hopefully I'll see you. If not, Amy will yell at me. Ian.
Right. Mark, along with the lack of any strategy plan day after or anything that's happening to fill the vacuum, the world at the moment is assuming that Israel's end plan is to expel 1 or even 2 million Gazans from the Gaza Strip. Rightly or wrongly, that's what the world is tending to assume at the moment. And that's also fueling some of the bad news and the bad image.
Absolutely. I mean, look, enough ministers have been saying it. Um, look, I don't think the Israeli public supports the idea, certainly not expelling them. If people wanted to leave, there's nothing wrong with if some people want to leave, but there's nowhere to really go. I mean, there's some countries that might accept them. Um, but again, we have ministers that open their mouths all the time because they want to be on TV and everything else. And it's a terrible message for the world. Um, Again, there's no way to stop these people. Look, in a normal government, in a normal place, when certain ministers would have said things that they've said, the prime minister would have fired them on the spot. But no, I mean, look at today. Ben-Gvir goes onto the Temple Mount, totally trashes the status quo agreement. And what does Netanyahu say? Israel is not changing the status quo agreement. Doesn't even attack Ben-Gvir for doing it. Not to mention doesn't fire him on the spot, which is what he needs to do. But he can't do and he won't do. So who cares about our image? Who cares about what's going to happen in Muslim countries about doing this if they claim that Israel is about to take over the Temple Mount again? How many Jews died because of the claim that we were taking over the Temple Mount, which we never did? Remember, the Hebron riots in 1939 started because of placing of a mechitza at the Kotel, and the claim by the claim that we were about to take over the Temple Mount. That was the claim that was made. And look what ended up happening. The Jews of Hebron were massacred, and other Jews all over Palestine were killed as a result of this false claim that was made because we moved the mechitza or set up a mechitza at the Kotel, which isn't even on the Temple Mount. So, yes. Anyone else?
Yes,
Richard.
yes, Mark. So first, I want to thank you for doing the Tel Aviv Diary. I think it's a lifeline to what's actually happening, given that I can't watch the news anymore. So thanks for that. Two questions. One, you've mentioned a number of times that the Israelis are not seeing what's happening in Gaza because it's not shown on network TV. Is that to assume that most Israelis are not scrolling through social media and seeing what's happening? And then the second question is, if there were an election held tomorrow, would things, in your opinion, change significantly and quickly?
Okay, so two answers to that. First of all, Israelis do get a lot of their news from social media, but in the same way that Americans only follow social media that they agree with, so the Israelis are following Telegram channels or Facebook feeds with people who they agree with.
Gotcha.
So the fact of the matter is, Haaretz readers are following things and seeing things, the pictures they're trying to avoid seeing on TV. But the bulk of the Israeli public, even the ones, look, Channel 13 is the most, I call it left leaning. I don't even know how to define it, but is leans to the left. I mentioned the 3 or 4 days ago, there was when the first time in that terrible picture that ended up being fake on the front of the Daily Telegram on one of the news shows that it's called Ezor Milchama, the War Zone by Raviv Drucker, who's a fairly big critic of the government, which would be an understatement. There they showed the actual picture. When it came to the main news at 8 o'clock, they blurred out the picture. They showed the fact that it was on the news, but they blurred out the picture. There is a sense the Israeli public doesn't want to see these pictures. And of course, news media is a commercial venture. And you don't want to lose, we have Channel 14, which only things on Channel 14 are the government is great in every which way, in every possible way. You listen to some of the things that they say on Channel 14, not only the government great, but it's very problematic to say the very least. Now we have I-24, which cut back tremendously its English broadcasting and its Arabic broadcasting and its French broadcasting so it could have a Hebrew channel. And for reasons that escape me, decided they needed their Hebrew channel to be a channel that was going to support the government and primarily be a replacement for Channel 14 on Shabbat, because Channel 14 does not broadcast on Shabbat. So on Shabbat, you have I-24's news, which is close, not exactly, but they have a lot of very right-wing people, especially on Shabbat. But generally speaking, and someone who knows that channel, they've cut a lot of the left-wing people, and they make sure they lean to the right. So no, Israelis get their news from the same places that they want to hear from, and the place they want to hear from only shows good things, so to speak. It's the same bubble that we're all in. One of the biggest problems in America and the world these days is we're in our own media bubbles and we never see anything else. As to your question, right now, the polls vary from day to day. Netanyahu definitely does not have a government. Um, on any given day, it can look like the opposition has a government without the Arabs. That's one of the issues because they claim they won't start a government based on the Arab parties. So on most days, most polls show that they will get it. What will happen in an actual campaign, I don't know. Netanyahu is a terrible leader, but he's a great politician. So I fear the political race that he will run. And he's always surprised us, negatively, if you want to say, or positively, doing better than we possibly think. Why he would want to run at 75 and he's not in the best of health. We don't know what his story is, and why he won't make a deal to get out of his case and retire and go around the world speaking. I do not understand. I don't understand any of these politicians at these ages wanting to stay in power. I mean, uh, you know, I'm considerably younger, but I don't think I'd want the job of president of the United States or the prime minister at my age. And I don't understand these people. I mean, I guess power is corrupting, and the aphrodisiac of being in power is so great. They just need to stay in power, but it's terrible for the world. Um, Biden should have left politics at 75. Trump should have left politics at 75, and it's Bibi's turn at 75. I don't think world leaders should be above 75. That would be my, you know, not term limits, but age limits. I'm an ageist. There's a limit to at what point. I don't, you can be a senator longer. You got to sit around and talk about things. But presidents, prime ministers, no, not doesn't make any sense. Stacy, Stacy, you're muted. Unmute yourself. No, you're still muted.
There.
There you go. Okay.
Um, I'm very puzzled with how is it that we hear that the price for flour and whatever else goes through into Gaza is so expensive for people to have. Isn't this supposed to be something that is being sent to everybody, not to be sold, but to be had?
Yeah,
How
but
is it that it became a business?
okay. So the UN admits that 80% of its shipments get stolen along the way.
By whom?
Hamas. Hamas
Okay.
deals and some other gangs. It's not all Hamas, but it's Hamas and other gangs. They then resell it. I mean, they can't use all the flour themselves. They then resell it to merchants, and the merchants buy it and sell it to the population. And of course, as we all know, in a free economy, which in a strange way, the marketplace in Gaza is a free economy, supply and demand. When there isn't enough flour, the price goes way up. When there's enough, the price goes down. And
I get where you're getting to. My question then is, why does this not get discussed out to the world so that this becomes, if they're starving, is because somebody's staying with the food and selling it too high for people to have.
Well,
It's
we have two problems. One, we have this, it doesn't fit the narrative. Look, as you know, I'm not exactly not a critic of the government here, but one of the absurd articles in the New York Times last week was an Israeli military source said that Hamas is not stealing the food. And that was a New York Times article. It was a big article on the front page of the New York Times early last week. I'm not sure which day. And that was again picked up by everybody else, NPR, CNN, et cetera, et cetera. An unnamed Israeli military source made that statement. It's false. Like I said, Israel is far from perfect when it comes to all these things. But the fact that Hamas has been stealing the food is an absolute fact. The UN says so. Maybe they don't walk around with badges that say Hamas on their shirts, but the UN admits 80% of the food shipments get stolen. So, and
not
it's
just stolen, it gets sold to people that don't have the money to buy it.
right, they get stolen and then sold to the merchants who then distribute it. That's the distribution method. And if the cost of food was very, very low, then maybe more people would be able to buy it. Now, keep in mind the fact that people in Gaza have not worked for a year and a half, almost 2 years now. There's been no
Yeah.
school. It doesn't exist. The civil society in Gaza doesn't exist. That's our fault, and that's Hamas's fault. Now, Hamas would rather all its people starve and the civil society fall totally apart. We made, before October 7th, one of our major fallacies, one of them, not all of them, one of our major fallacies was that Hamas was interested in governing. Hamas was not interested in governing. They wanted to govern only as a cover for their terror war. So they are not interested in governing. They don't care. They couldn't care less what happens to the people of Gaza. All they care about is Hamas fulfilling their agenda, which is the unification of Palestine under Hamas rule. And that's what they want. And everything else is secondary. And it's just a method. So, yes, does the world know? Sometimes they do. Sometimes foreign leaders know, but it's not convenient. And foreign leaders are under domestic pressure. And look, our support in the world is very low. And so, even when the leaders support us, because they have the intelligence, they know what's going on, they're under pressure from the people. And the people, we're the colonists. And the narrative that we're the colonists and we're the bad guys and there's nothing we can do that's going to be good has gotten stronger and stronger. And guess what? We have been making it stronger ourselves by some of our actions. So here we are in this terrible loop, a terrible loop which we don't have any easy solutions to solve. I mean, I believe we should solve and, just agree to pull out and worry about Hamas another day, get back our hostages. But that's a separate issue. Ian. again.
Let's assume tomorrow the war comes to an end. All the hostages, alive and dead, are returned. Hamas is no longer in power.
Not gonna
It
be.
still doesn't solve the underlying basic issue, the cause of so much violence in the region, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And there's no progress towards it. So even if all this comes to an end tomorrow, there'll be more violence continuing in the West Bank or wherever else it may be.
Look, we have two problems. One is we have our own messianic groups, and I should mention the fact that there's been discussion. It was actually on one of the radio shows I was listening to before, and my wife and I were discussing it before. You know, it's Tisha B'Av, right? So the lessons of Tisha B'Av, uh, the first accepted lesson is that the temple fell because of fighting between the Jews. But that's not really the real historic reason. The temple fell be because because a messianic part of the Jewish community thought that we could revolt against the Roman Empire, who was the strongest empire in the world, who basically ruled with a soft fist, allowed every country, every place they ruled to have their own identity, their own gods, didn't interfere in any of those ways, but still ruled over all these countries all over the world. They were the strongest rulers all over the world, and we had a messianic group who thought we could revolt against them. And guess what? Didn't end well. Didn't end well. Well, now we have a messianic group who believes that God gave us this land, and I get it sometimes. Some of the comments from my diary, I get emails or whatever. You're forgetting the fact that God gave us this land. And I believe that God gave us this land and gave us all the land, and we have to have all the land. And the hell with the rest of the world, excuse the expression. Well, guess what? The rest of the world is like the Roman Empire, and we cannot exist as an island with the whole rest of the world against us. It won't work. You know, we can hold up for a while if the United States continue to support us, but the United States won't continue to support us forever. You look at the current polling and everything else, it's looking pretty dismal in our medium and long term. So they are messianics, and they have been the tail that's been wagging our dog, at least for this government, but it goes back many, many years. All the illegal settlements that were created over the last 25 years. I'm not talking about the settlements that were approved by the government. I'm talking about the ones that are illegal and that were made legal afterwards because they forced the issues. And so they've been wagging us, and it's very frightening. But I'll give this but. There is another side to it. And the reality is that if we look back historically, the reason there isn't one of the major reasons there is no peace between us and the Palestinians is Hamas. Hamas consistently tried to stop any sort of peace effort. They stopped as soon as Oslo and Camp David occurred, they immediately started the suicide bombings back then that started turning the Israeli public against it. And then the Israelis counterattacks started turning the Palestinian public against it. The second Intifada, which was mostly Hamas initially, ended any chance amongst Israelis for believing there could be a peace. So they've done a very, very good job of convincing Israelis there can be no peace. And there has not been a Palestinian leader who's been willing to say two things. One, the refugee situation will be settled within the boundaries of the state of Palestine and not within the boundaries of the state of Israel. B, that Israel can be the one Jewish state in the world. And excuse me, C, this is the end of conflict. There hasn't been one. That's why Arafat walked away from Camp David with Clinton. That's why he refused the Clinton plan afterwards, the final plan, and never came back with an alternative plan. So to, claim that the Palestinians don't have any power in this whole thing is also wrong. If there had been a Palestinian Nelson Mandela, they would have had a state a long time ago. But there hasn't been one. And now we're 25 years later, and I don't know. I don't know. We want to solve the problem. We all want to solve the problem. But I don't know how we solve the problem because the hatred has gotten worse. If I'm a Gazan right now, a young man in Gaza, I hate the Israelis twice as much as I did 3 years ago. My brother was killed by the Gazans. I've been starving for you name it. I've lots of good reasons to hate the Gazans. So I hate the Gazans, hate the Israelis. So I don't really see. I'm not optimistic when it comes to that. Finding a solution, love to, but I don't know what it is. Okay,
I have
you got it.
I have something in the works. I'll email it to you when I finish.
Okay, I'm all in favor of something, but we've been through a lot of somethings over the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
So we'll see. Anyone else? Okay, someone's raising their hand, whoever you are.
Mark, it's
Yeah.
Harvey.
Go ahead, Harvey.
I apologize for missing most of this. My daughter just called in. Um, there are some parameters. One is that the Palestinians are not going anywhere. Another is that the Israelis aren't going anywhere. Another one is that nobody wants the Jews if they all have to evacuate. And the other is nobody wants the Palestinians if they have to evacuate. So if nobody's going anywhere and we have two peoples who are totally unwanted by everybody, then what's the solution? And how do you negotiate with people who don't want to negotiate anyway? And how is it and how do you make an accommodation to live within a state that could for the next couple of decades be run by a terrorist group? And if you've covered that material, you don't have to answer the question.
I wasn't cover. I didn't really cover it other than my last answer. Look, I was pessimistic before October 73, 2023. I was not optimistic. I had come to the conclusion that we were not going to reach peace in my lifetime. And I'm going to assume, if I'm lucky, I'll live another 20 years. So my lifetime, hopefully 20 years. Um, Hopefully not shorter, but I came to the conclusion that the first political action I ever took was when I was in seventh grade at Westchester Day School, and we went down to Washington on the Six-Day War. And it would be nice if sometime before I died, we reached some sort of a peace agreement and Israel could live in peace. At various points in my life, I thought it was possible. I no longer think it's possible. It's depressing to think it's not possible, but it doesn't mean we have to live at war. And the question is, my view is, what can we do to make sure that that we don't live at war? We won't reach peace, but we can live in some form of get along together and see where the world takes us in the next 20 years. Look, there may be other things that may endanger all of us. I'm a incredible big user of and big pessimist about what artificial intelligence is going to do, for instance. Maybe it's going to take over the world and it won't be relevant at all. Or maybe the sea is going to rise so high that Gaza won't exist because it'll be inundated by oceans. I mean, all sorts of terrible things could possibly happen in the next 20 years because things are not going in the best direction for mankind. So, but let's assume for the moment that AI doesn't take over the world, and let's assume the oceans don't rise 20 feet and swamp Gaza and who knows what else, and New York, obviously. Um, but let's assume those things don't happen. We could, if our goal is to live in peace, not reach peace, live in peace with the people next door, there are a lot of things we could do, and we could stop creating new settlements and taking their land in the West Bank. We could get them more water, all sorts of things we could do to improve their lives, both their lives in the West Bank and the lives in Gaza. Will it make them love us? No. Will it make them never want to attack us again? No. But if we also make sure the price of attacking us is so high that they're not going to want to do it, and to some extent, that's what this whole war is about, to some extent, make the price so high. But if the price is so high and our intelligence is not sleeping, not sleeping at the time, and we see any sort of attempt to try to put together anything, we stop it beforehand, then we can live with them. They won't be our friends, but they won't be able to do anything. And so that's what it will be. And we can go about our lives. We'll still spend too much money on defense. We'll have too many people in the army for too long. But hey, listen, Herzl was only half right. The idea of a Jewish state was a place where Jews can come of refuge, place to run, and it's worked in that sort of way. But it created a Jewish state, and a Jewish state is where people, the way they hate the Jews, they hate the Jewish state too, and that's the reality. So we have to live with that reality, and overcome it to some extent. I don't have an optimistic view of in that sense, but I think we can cope. We can't cope with what's going on now for any longer. This
So
we can't cope with.
the follow-up question is, you've got Israel has elections in 26. Is it possible to elect somebody who isn't Netanyahu, who also is willing to put a stop to settlement construction in the West Bank?
The
Or is
first part,
that a contradiction in terms?
no, the first part, absolutely. To stop Netanyahu, yes. The second part, I don't know. Second part, I do not know. Um, I don't think anyone's going to be willing to stop construction of existing settlements. Um, I think someone will stop new settlements from being built. Right now, the trend is negative. More people are leaving the West Bank than are going to the West Bank. So there is no reason for more construction in that direction. People of our generation are realizing it's really not a great place to be older on one of these settlements. The medical care is, the hospitals are far away, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of them moving back to Jerusalem and other sort of places. And there are not a lot of new people moving to the settlements. I mean, obviously there's internal growth because of high birth rates, but even that, a lot of them are deciding to live in other places in the country. So I don't think that's the problem. The ideological attempt at creating settlements everywhere that's a whole other story. But that's overcomable, I think.
So I'd like you to contradict the following thesis. Once Gaza is settled, whatever settled means, uh, the West Bank will explode, and it will be worse. That explosion will be worse than Gaza.
Why?
Because of the settlements.
Why?
Because there will,
Why?
well,
Why will they be able to? No, no, no. I think you're making so whoever's making that statement is making a terrible mistake in not
it's me.
understanding two
I'm
things.
making a mistake.
What?
It's me. I'm making a terrible
Okay, so
mistake.
you don't understand what the Shabak does in those places. I mean, the fact of the matter is, look, Gaza took place because they were able to organize. Uh, and they were able to organize and get, and put together groups to attack. When any more than two or three West Bank Palestinians get together to plan anything, the Shabak knows about it and arrests them. And that's the difference between the West Bank and Gaza. They could never get together and do something like they did in Gaza. They haven't even, thankfully, been able to arrange any significant bombings of any kind. They've been stopped almost constantly. In addition to the Palestinian Authority, that's helped to some extent in doing that. So no, I think that's a ridiculous proposition. I think um, I think just the opposite. If it hasn't occurred now, considering what we're doing in Gaza and the pictures that are coming out of Gaza, and it hasn't happened now, I certainly don't see if actually we come to some sort of peace and we end the war there, it's likely to happen then. So that's my sense. That's way down there in my concerns, generally speaking.
Have you covered what the logistics are of how you feed or deliver food in non-chaotic manner to Palestinians? I mean, they have no place to live. They have no place to go.
I have no solutions, frankly. We've put it into a position. That's why I'm so depressed because I don't know of any good solutions. Just flood so much food, so much food in every single direction, whether it's parachuting it in, bringing 1,000 trucks in a day and placing it all up. Just flood it with food. It's the only solution. That it won't pay to resell it because food will be available everywhere. It's the only solution I see. Other than sending Israeli troops in to distribute it, which is a terrible idea because it's way too dangerous. But just flood the place with food in every which way you possibly can. Um, that's the solution.
Mark, that's not sustainable. It can fix a short-term
Well,
problem.
right now we need to fix a short-term problem. Right now we need to eliminate the possibility of hunger or of starvation in Gaza because there is pockets that are clearly in that direction. We need to find ways of providing more medical care. I mean, if I very early in the war, I don't know if any of you remember, I wrote an article when they were talking about the fact that we weren't allowing the Gazan women to give birth. I suggested Israel set up a birthing hospital right outside Gaza and offer it to any Gazans who wanted to give birth, free, maternal care. Come here. You go back when you're with your baby after you've given birth. Um, and maybe no one would have come, but we would have done it. Then it would have been like, okay, to the world, you're saying we're not doing it. Well, here's what we're doing. But, our government can't do anything like that. And that would be
Can the
so.
UN play a constructive
No,
role?
the UN can't play a constructive role at the moment because every UN employee in Gaza works for Hamas. Let's understand that. When we talk about the UN in Gaza, they all work for Hamas, with almost no exceptions. It would require, some other aid group to come in there, possibly. And does anyone have, can any aid group get in there and feel like they're not going to be killed by Hamas? I don't know.
What about the Red Crescent?
Person with her hand up wanted to know about GHF. It's in the chat.
Okay. Look, Red Crescent, they don't have the people to do this. The Red Crescent is basically an ambulance service more than anything else. And GHF, which was started by the Israeli government with the Americans in some form or another, um, basically, is limited to the sites that it set up. They were talking about setting up 20 sites all over Gaza. That might have worked if there would have been 20 sites all over the place, leaving aside the dangers and how you would do it. But they only have four sites, four sites for 2 million people. Do the math. Doesn't work. And like I said, the problem with the sites where they're only open for an hour a day or 2 hours a day, or whatever it was, they needed to be open 24/7. These sites need to be open all day, all the time, and they need to be closer to the population. Then it might work. Then it might work. It'd be dangerous, but put it right in the middle of Tzir Nitzarim. Put up a site right there in the middle. But you got to make sure that tens of thousands of people don't overwhelm it, and you're not forced to fire on people and all those other little problems. They're not little problems because then we're killing people who want food. But there could be solutions. But it requires planning and it requires putting effort. And I'm sorry, but it requires probably putting the Air Force in charge instead of the people in the army. That's a ding to too much of the Israeli armed forces. But the Air Force is the only part of a little bit the Navy that really has their act totally together. And that's the reality. The sort of planning that was needed to do this just wasn't done. And of course,
what did you mean by the UN? I don't understand exactly what you meant by that.
okay, the UN has thousands of employees in Gaza. Thousands of employees. There's schools. There also all the stuff the UN has been doing in Gaza for the last 70 years. The United Nations, relief organization set up set up after the 1948 war. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of employees in Gaza. Who do you think these thousands and thousands and thousands of people are? They're not independent world civil servants. They are people who they hired locally, and in most cases are either directly Hamas members, or their brothers are Hamas members, or their father's a Hamas member, or whoever. They're controlled by Hamas, almost overwhelmingly. That's been the story of the UN all the way through. And it's been the story of a lot of the independent aid agencies that have local employees. Look, and with this I want to conclude. There are journalists in Gaza, right? But they're no foreign journalists. Now, that's partly our problem, our mistake, or maybe it's not a mistake because I don't know what they'd see. But every single one of the journalists are locals. Every local, does anyone believe that any local Gazan doesn't have some sort of affiliation with Hamas? Do you think he would live to see the next day if he was a journalist and was critical of Hamas? So understand the fact that the journalists in Gaza, who, quote unquote, the AP journalist from Gaza who's sending the latest news, he's not exactly an independent guy. He's not exactly someone who's not dependent on Hamas to stay alive. And whether it's AP or the New York Times or wherever it is, that's the reality. And so we need to keep that in mind. That's the sad reality. Okay, everybody, I thank you. You know, weeks ago I was optimistic that this would be the last week or something like that. I'm not optimistic at the moment. Um, I fear we will see each other again in 2 weeks. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you're watching if you're listening to the podcasts, the end of the podcast, if you get them on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, like us, give it a good review or something like that. At any rate, I thank you for your time and see you all next time. Take care.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Where's my end all?
Bye.